This is Greg Canty here, and welcome to the Win Happy podcast. Stay tuned for interesting chats with interesting people about winning their lives and being happy at the same time. This show has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. Thanks for listening. On today's podcast, I had the honour of speaking to one of my heroes, the artist Jim Fitzpatrick, who brought us the iconic painting of Che Guevara, who brought the essence of Thin Lizzy to life on their album covers, who worked intimately with Sinead O'Connor, and whose life passion is capturing Celtic mythology. Jim celebrates his 80th birthday in December, and as part one of this two-part podcast, he speaks about his early life, a bout with TB, picking fruit with George Harrison, and the accidental meeting with Che Guevara, and a career in the marketing world. The iconic painting of Che Guevara brought a lot of attention and lots of work. And then came Thin Lizzy and a special friendship with their charismatic driving force, Lynott. Let's hear from Jim. Jim Fitzpatrick, a colossal welcome to the Win Happy podcast.
Nice to be here.
And as Jim Fitzpatrick, the artist, Che Guevara, Thin Lizzy, Sinead O'Connor, Celtic mythology, the list goes on. And what I'd like to do, if that's okay, is for the listener to get to know you a little bit. They know a lot about you, but I'd like them to get to know you, if that's okay. And I'm going to kick off by launching a little story on you that we might come back around to. So back in 2007, myself and the lovely Deirdre got married. It was second marriages. We got married down in Killarney, and a client of ours was the Killarney Art Gallery, the McBride Art Gallery, had an exhibition, and it was a mixed exhibition of different artists. And the thing I wasn't reckoning on at all about getting married, because in my days people bought you pots and pans when you got married as presents. But in 2007, people ended up giving you money. And like, Jesus almighty, what are you going to do with this money? So we're at this exhibition. And at this point in time, we were both working from home, start up little business and everything. And in the exhibition, it was a selection of mixed artists. And there was this mad cap painting with a minotaur suspended by these balloons, colourful balloons. And Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs were there, and Snow White was guiding the Minotaur in with the things that...
That sounds like Tim Booth now.
Yes. So
Tim had a wonderful, quirky way of painting. He had an exhibition where I showed the Che poster, actually, in the Brown Thomas Gallery. Brown Thomas in those days was owned by John Maguire when I worked with one of his family. I think he was also related to Eddie Maguire, who's one of my favourite Irish artists, extraordinary painter. Nobody gives a shit about it, but extraordinary. He painted that famous painting of Seamus Heaney. He painted owls. His work is iconic. He painted, actually, I must tell you about Charlie Haughey, but he painted Charlie Haughey on the horse.
Oh my God.
Squire Haughey, who I knew pretty well as well, and liked enormously despite his politics, They had a gallery downstairs in Brown Thomas when it was on the far side of the road where Marks and Spencer's are now. Beautiful store, big stairwell that went upwards and all. Fantastic stuff. And Tim had his exhibition down there, and I went to the opening of it. And my favourite painting, and I can remember well, was Rupert on the Moon, because I loved Rupert Bear.
I remember Rupert.
Rupert on the Moon will give you some idea of Tim's work. He's still alive and working away. He's a big comic fanatic, huge into Eagle comics. I'll tell you a story about Tim Booth now, relating to myself and Thin Lizzy.
I know what you see. So I'm going to bring that around during the course of our chat, if that's okay. And the idea of the painting was, it was so mad. I thought, when we do become big and official and have an office and a meeting room, that we would put this painting in the meeting room. So while someone was waiting for us to come in, if there was delays, they might stare up at this thing and wonder what in the name of God was going on. And it would be a talking point, if nothing else. So that was actually the first part of us having proper offices. We said, okay, we're on the way now. That's for the office. And we'll
What are you doing in the offices?
Yeah, so we're a marketing and a PR agency. That particular office was in Cork City. And we since opened an office in Dublin. And now the ironic thing is that there's no one using the offices because everyone is home working. So I've now removed that picture from the wall in the office, and it's sitting in my own home office down in Crookhaven.
Right, yeah.
Which I insist on you seeing at some point, if that's okay.
It's a long drive. Have you a helicopter?
This is true. This is true.
Oh, I remember coming back from Crookhaven, and as we were going across the Midlands, it was all snow. I drove through the Caymania Pass in a Mini. A snowfield with my ex-wife and my daughter, who's my best, what's the word for it? My best friend, my best guardian angel, right now. She's over next Monday. She comes over to me. She lives in Milan, comes over to me.
Your daughter?
But my daughter remembers the snow as well, because it was just magical. I have loads of pictures of it, even when she was a nipper. Just we had to stop because the view up at the top of the Caymania Pass was extraordinary. Caymania means the jump of the deer. Well, it's like a gap the deer is supposed to have jumped,
I don't know if you're a fast driver, but you'll get to my door, I promise, from Sutton okay, I need to allow for Dublin city traffic. Okay, let's see.
5 hours at least. I go up to Derry. My grandkids are in Derry, so that's a long drive. But
5 hours, you're right. You're spot on. And that's avoiding peak traffic time and everything else.
Be in America quicker.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So, where did you grow up, Tim?
I grew up in Dublin. Started off in Skerries. My father was a multimillionaire who blew it all and left my mother and his mother homeless. Sold dozens of houses, well, not dozens, about half a dozen houses that he remortgaged for his gambling and drinking, and left my mother, as she said herself, God rest her, with 2 and 6 in her arse pocket. So we were homeless, and we lived in a shed at the back of the garden for a couple of weeks when my mother tried to find somebody to take us in, literally.
What age would you have been when that happened?
5. And then we moved up to Dublin to Lasnavan, lived with my mother's sister, and there was a house full of women, and it was fascinating. I had a great childhood despite all the shit that went on, I mean, I got TB, I got everything,
Did your dad just disappear from the scene then, from your point of view, did he?
Went on and remarried. Not remarried, sorry. He got another partner. His nurse, who looked after him, a psychiatric nurse in Grange Gorman, which, funnily enough, my mother's wife's sister was the matron of. When she came back from America, she worked for the Mellon family. And herself and the Miss Willis. These are all people I knew from my childhood, were the matrons in Grange Gorman. And my father was a regular there because he was drying out. I think Smiley in the Irish Times had a gig with Grange Gorman that they dry out his staff because Flann O'Brien, Sean O'Sullivan was one of the gang. I'm just trying to remember all the names. They were well-known names at the time anyway, I mean, Smiley was the famous editor of the Irish Times during the war,
So did he see you, Jim, your dad?
I talk about meeting Che Guevara in Kilkee, but I don't talk about it as my dad turned up at Kilkee. I just leave it at that. But he turned up.
Yeah, okay. That changed you, I suspect.
I've met his other son since. He's a lovely guy, Really nice man. What annoyed me about him was that he was saying how wonderful and caring my father was, but I grew up with this chip on my shoulder after being abandoned. But I've used that chip to fuel my work. And
that's sort of the thing that you had in common with your good buddy Phil Lynott, wasn't it?
Yeah, we were both, when we got talking, forget about all the music crap. When we got talking, I asked him, I didn't want to say which side he is black. I knew he was from Crumlin. I knew loads of his friends. Frank Murray, his best friend, was someone I played football with from when we were young. We used to play in Phoenix Park. And Philip, anyway, disclosed to me that he'd been abandoned by his father. Now, we all use terminology like that, and it's accurate enough, but it's never quite accurate, Because Phyllis, his mum, told me that she saw his father in Manchester, looked at him and said, I'll have him. That's how Philip was conceived.
Yeah. So it wasn't quite the same thing.
And Philip was not comfortable with the fact that he'd never met his father. His father did turn up at a later stage in Dean Street, where the office was. But my father didn't make any appearances at all, made no attempt to support us. Not that he could support anybody. I think he had trouble supporting the family he had over in England. He worked as a cameraman for the BBC, I gather. And, RTE have done a film about me and my relationship with my father. I can't remember the title of it, but it had great ratings at the time anyway. And my stepbrother, Chris, is one of these people you'd really take to. He's a lovely man. But for me, all I see is pain. It brings up stuff I don't want to know about. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So we'll leave it there. So what do you think?
Oh, no, I'm happy to talk about it. I'm just saying, I don't want to spend my life talking about it.
Of course, yeah.
I'm not interested in reconstructing a past that didn't exist.
Yeah. Did it change you?
Of course it does. Everything changed you. I had cancer, 8 years ago? Jeez, I thought I was radical. It radicalized me. I realized I spent so much of my time creating all these beautiful objects, I think. And you can't cure world hunger. You can't cure suffering, but you can make people aware of it. Look at Hamas at the moment in Palestine or in Israel slaughtering people. Look at, the Gaza ghetto now about to be liquidated. It's like watching the Warsaw ghetto live on TikTok. I'm an anti-Nazi. I've read every book in the Holocaust, huge admirer of the Jewish race, Jewish people, not the Israelis. And how do you fight against that? I just posted a painting today I did in 2018. Point out how the IDF target medics and journalists. And they murdered a young girl whose family have written to me to thank me, called Razan al-Najjar. Nobody's ever heard of her, just a casualty. But she was a young girl in Gaza when they were having that right of return protest, and they were being shot all the time by snipers. And she wanted to show the men of Gaza, they're all fundamentalists, right-wing stuff. But they have a cause, and a very good one, unfortunately, because these are fanatics. And immensely brave, too. We have to, what's the word for balance? But so are the SS and the Eastern Front, so let's not get carried away. And we have the Israelis. I think an Israeli scholar defined them as pseudo-Nazis, or judo-Nazis, sorry, which is incredibly offensive if you think about it. But when you watch what they're doing to the Gaza ghetto, is it any different to what the Germans did in the Warsaw ghetto? Except the Germans allowed all the Polish combatants, they massacred all the Jews, they allowed all the Polish combatants to walk free, march away without their arms, with honor. The Israelis won't be doing that with Hamas. So we have two sets of, to me, fascists and innocent people caught in the middle, and the EU telling us it's okay. The same EU that Ursula von der Leyen said only a couple of months ago that Putin's attempt to starve Ukraine to submission by cutting off water, electricity, you name it, was a war crime. But they're white, so it makes a difference. I'm all in favor of the Ukrainian independence. But I don't believe they should be treated any differently from Palestinians, or Palestinians should be treated any differently from them.
It stood on a sore toe because we could relate to them so much easier, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The Palestinians ring a bell with us, the bell of hundreds of years of oppression. We can identify with them,
It's funny. I was at a KPMG budget breakfast in Porky Queeve the other day, pouring out of the heavens. I'm sitting there and Ivan Yates is speaking and there's some economist speaking and someone talking about properties. And we're all sitting there in our suits as our breakfast is served.
I know a few of them actually that we could mention, but we won't. One or two of them are good people. Good.
Yeah, and our bacon and sausage and all of that business and our coffees, and we're all worried about what they'll do with taxes and who the next government is and all that kind of thing. And I was looking out the window at the football pitches thinking, at least we don't have to worry about bombs landing on us today.
Well, you saw that they did that to kids in Gaza playing football on the beach a couple of years ago. Children killed children playing football. I played football till I was 68, so that kind of stuff chills me to the marrow. How anybody would do that? But that's what they do. They regard these people as the Untermensch. They're the new Untermensch, slaughter them. That's not thinking, These are people.
And the electricity has been cut off in Gaza and the water, and they're about to be slaughtered.
Oh, yeah, and he said that they will remake the map of the Middle East with this action. In other words, they're going to turn Gaza into a car park. We're going to watch it, and the EU is going to support it, and America and Biden, an Irish-American who should know his history, is going to support it. I find it extraordinary. And meanwhile, we have Turkey, we have Saudi Arabia, we have Iran, we have all these countries. Are they going to do anything about it? I think they will for the first time. So we could be in a bloody world war in a week or two. People, think Putin won't use nukes. Putin will use nukes if his job is threatened. Simple as that.
And he's like our other buddy in the States, Trump. They just care about themselves,
Trump will be in next election too, because Biden isn't looking good at all. Certainly in the polls, he's way behind, and health-wise, he doesn't seem all in the right shape, shall we say.
Yeah, I'm just praying to God that people have enough sense over there not to vote for the other guy, and that'll keep him in.
Future Western democracy is at stake, and it's in the hands of a man who's quite capable, and facing him is a man who would destroy it.
When did the art kick into your life? You mentioned you were sick, and I read somewhere. Was that, while on the sick bed and you're doodling because there was nothing else you could do? Or is that where that kicked in?
No, I was the guy at the back of the class, or the front of the class. He moved me up to try and make me work. Just drew away all day. I was very lucky. I went to St. Pat's Training College, they call it now, but St. Patrick's Primary School in Drumcondra. And it was an old Victorian building, beautiful. They demolished it, of course. And we used to sit on the pipes to warm our bums. It was just a fabulous place. And I had a teacher called Mr. Kleins, whose daughter contacted me many years ago when I mentioned him on the radio, because he's long dead. But he was one of these kindly men who kept coming over to me saying, "What are you doing, Mr. Fitzpatrick?" You know what I mean? And all I was doing was drawing. And I was drawing a book on a movie called The Robe with, what was that guy's name? Victor Mature. Remember him?
No, you don't.
In every film he looks as though he's about to break out crying if they put another arrow through him. He had the Saint Sebastian type face, very funny, very Italian. But I drew this comic book of The Robe. Now it was all pencil with coloured pencil in, on brown packaging paper. And he took one look at it and he said, "You're writing it and drawing it, yeah, carry on," and left me to it, I mean, that didn't happen back then. We were having the crap beaten out of us by other teachers with straps that are like fucking 6 inches thick. I called Johnny Bruder, who we loved because we always thought he killed Brian Boru, at least his family did. And Bruder's an old Irish Viking name. And I remember him getting that strap. And if you know St. Patrick's School, there's a little road, and then there's a dip, and it goes into the river, and the bridge, Drumcondra Bridge, goes over towards Fagan's, where Bertie used to hang out. And he threw the strap into the river there. We all had to wade in to see if we could find it. There's the Talca River, which could flood really easily. It's kind of dangerous,
Kind of.
But I always remember these incidents, and I got a very good, I won't say art education, but I got a very good education there. I remember my first foray into Celtic mythology was we had a teacher called Mr. Hayden, who wasn't as nice as Slynes, and he would whip you with a softer strap, about half an inch thick. And he would stand up and he'd start, "Vi ri in Ern fa do daravanam lir." We'd all have to say, "Vi ri in Ern fa do daravanam lir." That's how I learned the Children of Lear at the end of a strap.
Lovely.
That was normal, but you remembered it. I tell you, I knew it off by heart.
Yeah, we had a Mr. O'Leary who was a very good, kind teacher in primary school. Now, to the best of my memory, he was a young man, relative to the other teachers. And we had a guy in the class, John Buckley, a right troublemaker. I'd say once a week, Mr. O'Leary, at the end of his tether, used to leather him. It didn't stop my boy Buckley anyway from acting up again.
Gritted your teeth, and it was sore when you got whacked. My Jesus, it was sore. I remember Mr. Kleins, who hated capital punishment, saying to me for the first time, when I had to be slapped for the first time, I can't even remember what it was over, and he said, "This is going to hurt me more than it hurt you." I've never forgotten that,
And he was telling the truth, I think.
Absolutely, he hated all that. But, I mean, how do you keep a bunch of gurriers wrecking the place?
Yeah.
We were feral. Nowadays, ferals just are set loose and they attack tourists. Back then, they were all in the classroom. We were taught good manners. I remember the cop, when I was cycling on the path opposite St. Patrick's, one day stopped me. And he said, "It's illegal to cycle on the footpath." And I said, Well, everybody else, I pointed at my friends, everybody else is doing it. And he said, if I put my hand in the fire, would you put your hand in as well? And I went, and you learn all this wisdom from the most bizarre people.
We collected
But
along the way.
all that crap. What is the good use if you're smart, because it's learning.
And tell me, Jim, the conversations around the kitchen table when you come home.
Well, my mother was a member previously of the League of Empire Loyalists. She was a devotee of the Stuttering King and Wallace Simpson. And her views would have been very traditionally right-wing. She was a big Fine Gael supporter. She was, we won't go into the details of it, but the blue shirts were within her orbit, shall we say. While my granny and my aunts and my uncle and all the relatives and the whole fucking street were all Dev supporters, De Valera, the IRA, the Black and Tans. I mean, my granny was still giving out about the famine because obviously they're traumatized. Now, we escaped the famine in Clare, and I found out later, I won't go into it because we lived in Kilmaley. And we were grain merchants and food producers, bakers. Right? I found this from the gravestones not that long ago, and from an expert in the or from a relative in the area. But it was a family you could nearly put the entire Irish race within that room because the memories were so intense from much earlier times. In other words, handed on and on and on. And her memories of that period were very clear. Now, they weren't well off, so we did have to watch money. But that fell into, when I put marmalade on the bread, she said, you're not tarmac in the road, take some of that off. Do you know what I mean? Everything was tight. The coffee was Ireland coffee. You got a teaspoon of it, the sticky coffee that you put in hot water, and that was coffee, It was just a strange time when you look back, but it was a fantastic time because like the women, especially my aunt Claire, who taught me to read and write, were incredibly intelligent. Like my cousin is Aoife McLysett, who's the top geneticist in UCD. She's from exactly the same stock. We have mutual granny, our great granny. All these women were working as clerks and carers and things. Do you know what I mean? My mother was a fashion buyer. Now, she wasn't an intellectual in the sense of the others, but she was somebody who knew everything about what was happening in the world at any given time. You know what I mean? She was a voracious newspaper reader rather than a book reader where the others read books. But growing up in that environment, when the Queen's speech would be on Christmas Day, we would go upstairs to the bedroom to listen to it, myself and my mum. And then we come down to deathly silence. Kill us on the spot. And this is over Christmas dinner in Turkey. You're trying to let everything thaw out of it and not get into political arguments, But the political arguments were fascinating. They were never screaming matches. Each accepted the other's position. And each accepted the other's position, as far as they were concerned, was untenable. So it was there all the time. And when I grew up right through my life in St. Patrick's College, in Gormston College, in County Meath, where I was a boarder, like one of my best friends was, but he's not too well at the moment, was Eamon De Valera, the grandson of Dev. And people from the country would have one view, people from the city would have another, and there was bits of Fine Gael and bits of Fianna Fáil in each of us, but it was never a big deal. Do you know what I mean? We were educated by Franciscans. They had missions in all of Latin America, and still do, and they're incredible. I'm a huge admirer and a follower of Father Leonardo Boff, who John Paul I and Ratzinger tried to destroy. He is the creator of liberation theology, right? He's a Franciscan. And the Franciscans, even though they were Catholic, I don't want to say conservative, but they obviously followed Catholic teaching. So they would be regarded as conservative. I never regarded them as that. I regarded them as incredibly kind and enlightened men. And luckily, thank God, it wasn't like Black Rock. We had no abusers. One came later after we left, I gather. But that's another day's work. I know so many people who went through that trauma. I was lucky. I had aunts who'd kill if anybody went near me. They would have eviscerated them, And you need that level of fear to keep kids safe. But it was just fascinating growing up in that environment where two polar opposites collide and yet had to coexist. It's like Khrushchev and Kennedy coming to the thing of mutual coexistence as opposed to mutual destruction. Now we're back to mutual destruction.
What was your mum's name?
Lily Elizabeth Fitzpatrick. You know?
It sounded like you were pals.
She was an O'Connor. Oh, she was very difficult to get on with. I mean, I loved her. She spent every penny of her life educating me, you know, because it cost money to put me through a private school like Ormston.
How did that come about? Because that's what I was thinking, you know, listen to your story and your dad not being there. Like, boarding school wasn't cheap. And was that something you were happy to do, or is that something she wanted for you?
I wasn't happy at first because I had all my friends at home. I had great friends. I had a really great intellectual friend called Tony Donegan, God rest him. He committed suicide after they emigrated to Canada when I was 16. And that was a huge wrench in my life. He was my best friend. He was the opposite of me. He was very religious. I'm a believer, but not religious in that sense. Do you know what I mean? But he was fanatical. But aside from that, we had the same interests. We would spend all our time up in Drumcondra Library, near where James Joyce used to live before they demolished that place in his honour. And my family were involved with Joyce. James Joyce wrote captions for my grandfather's magazine, The Leprechaun. So I was aware of a kind of a heritage of art from my grandfather, Thomas Fitzpatrick, who was a very famous cartoonist. Dublin City Council had brought out a book on him. That's at the turn of the century. And the Irish Times called him the cartoon wing of the Sinn Féin movement, you know, or of the Irish Revolution movement, something like that. Frank McNally in the Irish Times wrote a really good piece about him. But I grew up in this kind of feeling that I had a heritage, that I came from a rich family living on a very poor street. We were posh because we had little gardens the size of a shoebox in St. Michael's Road. Around the corner in St. Malachy's Road, they were like Coronation Street. You opened your door and you were on the street, you know. So growing up in Dublin, it was the safest place in the world. Ireland would say, I used to hitch to Clare. Do you know what I mean? I hitched from Kilkee when I was working there, home. Stopped by Ennis, went up to visit my Aunt Mary, who I lived with in Fountain Cross, Kilcurry. Beautiful, whitewashed, thatched cottage. They just got electricity. But the old cottage, we still boiled the water and the spuds on the fire. It was just magical for a kid from Dublin. I was sent there because I'd had TB. I was very weak, and the polio epidemic had broken out in Dublin. You have to remember, Dublin's a different place. Lots of slums back then. I worked in the Legion of Mary. Holy Christ. You'd walk in the door and retch with the smell. You know what I mean? It was unbelievable. You know, that was around Denmark Street. But anyway, I just grew up in a very happy environment, even though when I look back, my life was crazy. Absolutely daft.
And that boarding school experience, how old were you when you went there?
I was 13, and it was, I mean, only last Friday I met up with a couple of the guys. We meet every first Friday in Buswell's Hotel, right? And we're kind of dying off, obviously, but we've all sort of kept a good camaraderie. We had a class of people, about 40 or 50 of us, who kind of stuck together over the years, you know? And looked out for each other and kept in touch with each other, you know? And I'm not a big old school boy kind of type, as you know. But I don't know, I always look forward to it. We have a get-together every year. We had one in Malahide in the Grand Hotel this year. And people came from all over the world. Old guys like myself, you know? I'm 80 next birthday, don't forget.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so...
And it's such an easy thing to drop it into a conversation. You know, you're talking about you and your school buddies and you meet on that Friday in Buswell's and say, we're dying off. When you say that, and that's obviously a real thing, how does that make you feel when you process that?
Oh, bizarre, because I always thought I'd be long dead by 60. I just look around and think, whoopee, I'm still here. But my father died at what, 54, I think. My grandfather, 47. And I'm 80 in December, 29. It's like, whoa. I keep telling everybody, my kids are saying, would you stop telling everybody you're 80? You're not 80. And I'm saying, I like being 80.
You're in your 80th year. That's what I said to people.
I have an amazing life. You know, I have fabulous... Oh, sorry. I also have an amazing cat.
Ah, lovely.
Oh, wait. He's bloody mental. He discovered there's a slight slope on my floor, and if he starts, I'm going to have to stop him. And I have two metal ball bearings, right? And he will go to the end, he will push them up, and they'll roll back at him. And I'm like, I've never seen a cat do this. This is too weird. I showed my kid last night, who lives in LA, who runs my website. I was showing him the cat and the steel ball, and we were both going like, holy Christ. There's a poltergeist in here somewhere.
What was your first job?
No, my first job was picking fruit in Fruitfield Farms in Portrane with George Harrison, of all people, and people like that, the Beatles. But I met George when he came back with the Beatles in Dublin and played the Adelphi. And they were all to have a party in his mum's sister's house, which is around the corner from us in Clontarf Park in Drumcondra. And myself and my ex-wife, she was my fiance then, went to the Adelphi. And it was the weirdest experience of my life. Now, remember, I've been to a lot of gigs since. Nothing beats that one. I didn't hear a single note or word. It was a wall of screaming sound.
Oh, my goodness.
It was extraordinary. We came out and there were riots on the street, right? And we had to get the bus back to Drumcondra because the Beatles were coming to the party and we'd been invited. It was all top secret, obviously, but the road knew. And when we got to the party, George turned up. He was the only one who got there because he got in the back of a van and lay on the floor and they drove out the back. The others had to go back to the hotel. I think it was the Gresham they were staying in. And it was just exciting to see George in a different setting, but I never saw him again. Yeah.
How did you get that party invite?
Oh, because we lived around the corner and my mother and Mrs. French, who was the family name, George's mother's sister was Mrs. French, Bernie French. It was Bernie. And she invited us because my mother and herself were very good friends. But my mother loved every minute of it. My ex hated it, and I had fun.
Well, I know the story about Kilkee and the hotel and everything else, and you were obviously doing a bit of work to fund a trip to Rome, I believe.
Yeah, pilgrimage to Rome, because the Franciscans would not let, a lot of the people in our school were extraordinarily well off and rich, but you wouldn't let rich parents fund their children. They wanted everybody equal, so anybody who wanted to go on the pilgrimage had to get a job. So myself and my mate Gilbert Brosnan from Glasnevin as well, the two of us went down there together. I only talked to Gilbert 4 days ago. He lives up the hill beside me here. And he was there when I met Che, so he remembers it too. He's given, thank God, because we ran into totally by accident. My son lives in LA, he's a filmmaker. He came home and we were getting some stuff in the supermarket, walking by Starbucks in Sutton, and Gilbert is sitting in there. And I said to Redmond, there's the guy I was with in Kilkee. Gilbert came over to the house after and Redmond recorded his testimony because I always think, I'm telling the truth. Why doesn't everybody believe me? I have a witness. Do you know what I mean? That I never used.
Yeah, so it did happen.
Yeah, I mean, he was with me there. I mean, there's a great piece in History Ireland I wrote. Of course, I got the date wrong. I said 1962 and it's 61. And they pick on that like you're telling lies. Gilbert was the one who got the facts right and gave me the year. And a historian wrote after History Ireland put it on the cover and the whole story. But Tommy Graham is really a good guy who runs that outfit. And the historian wrote and said I couldn't possibly have been, I couldn't have been in Clare and Che couldn't have been in Clare and all this kind of stuff, I have photographs, I'll show you one. Hold on a second. I put it there to remind me. One of the important people in Kilkee these days is a very good man called John Williams. And his brother was a friend of mine in Kilkee. Right? John still runs, I think, a couple of businesses there. Have a look at this and try not to laugh. That's me, blonde. And on the other end is Mike Williams, John Williams' brother, outside the Marine Hotel before they bloody demolished that whole beautiful big frontage, with a girl. Don't mind my haircut. Honest to Christ, I cringe when I look at this stuff. I'm trying to show you the girl. The girl is Jill Clancy, and her daughter got in touch with me and said, my mom is the person you're talking about. And I got to talk to her again. I think she's 79, and she remembers it well. And what I didn't say to her was, I remember that her dad, herself, and the other girl, Mary Sliney was her name, a dark-skinned girl, beautiful, very Arab-looking. And they all vanished overnight without paying the bill.
Oh, Jesus.
Hey, the manager, Hawk, went effing ballistic and took it out on all of us. We had nothing to do with it. But the fact that I hung out with them was enough to get him absolutely rancid raging,
And after that experience of meeting Che Guevara and stuff, and obviously the famous painting and everything came after, was it in your head to start drawing him at that point, or did that come later?
No. After the incident of, when that photograph was taken and the whole outrage that went on. I was in charge of the bar. So I think Hoff decided I didn't really have anything to do with any of this. I just happened to know them. I had a terrible crush on her, to be honest. She was like Sandra D. You remember Sandra D? It was like, oh my God, you know, small, blonde and beautiful. 15 and I was 16. But after that, I'm trying to remember the shifts because there was another schoolmate of mine down there as well. But we didn't see them at all. Gilbert and myself shared a room together. In other words, we slept in one bed. I think we went head to toe at first, and then I thought, fuck this, and just went head to head. Luckily, we were both into beautiful girls in Kilkee. It could have been awkward. Well, we didn't think anything of that, you know what I mean? We spent our first couple of nights sleeping on a mattress on top of straw in a cow shed with the cows below us farting. I never forget it. I had to get out of there. It was stinking. It was just a whole bizarre time of my life. And in to the bar on a Sunday morning after Mass, I'm just opening in, walk Che Guevara and two guys, you know. I knew him immediately, right? But I was like, holy Christ. Now, there was only one other guy in the bar, a man called Sam, a local wit and raconteur is the only way to describe him, a lovely guy. And when I was down with Che's daughter in 2013 in Kilkee, I mentioned Sam in the speech, the talk I was giving, and somebody said, oh, I remember Sam well. He was an uncle. He was a lovely guy and all this stuff. But he was a great guy. He was always stand up. I needed people to stand up for me back then because I was tall, lanky, skinny redhead with freckles, you know. Very different from the rest of the people in Kilkee, you know. Like Irish, you know. And Che came into the bar and I asked him the obvious question. You know, I often say that great Spike Milligan line when my friend met Spike, he said, oh, teach yourself. And Spike said, who else would I be now? You know what I mean? I wasn't that stupid. I just said, oh, what are you doing here? What brings you to Kilkee? And he explained to me his English was much better than you'd imagine, faltering, but easy to understand. And remember, this same man, I'll tell you about it in a minute, had very long conversations with Maureen O'Hara. Okay. Because his family say, oh, he didn't speak good English. Maureen O'Hara testifies he spoke perfect English. And when he met me, his English might have been a bit rustier, you know, because he wasn't as fluid as, you know, she describes. Well, we got into a conversation, and in the middle of it, he said, I'm Irish. And I went, oh, I thought you were Cuban, you know. He said, no, I'm Argentinian Irish, you know. And that's how I learned of his background, you know. Now, he didn't go into any detail saying my father was this or my aunt was that, but he said our forebears came from Galway and Cork. Nobody mentions Cork.
Yeah, it's the Lynches of Cork, isn't it?
Of Ballyvorney, because I was doing a talk for the Sinn Féin summer school. I'm not a Shinner, but I like them because they're outreaching to everybody, including the Unionists. And they've stopped killing people. Not Sinn Féin, but the IRA. Long ago, thank God. But in Ballyvorney, when I was giving the talk afterwards, a journalist named Lynch, if you're listening, Mr. Lynch, I'd love to see you again, came up to me and we started chatting. And he said he was related to Che Guevara and that Che's family and his family were buried in the graveyard somewhere between Ballyvorney and Gougane-Barra. He said they're the Lynches that Che is descended from, not the Galway Lynches, who have grabbed him and embraced him, to be fair. You know, they've claimed him, you know.
Well, yeah, the first to spot the marketing opportunity of Che Guevara.
Che Guevara from Ballyvorney, I think, would be an interesting concept to do.
Yeah, and on the subject of marketing, I think that world sucked you in for a while.
I worked in advertising for years. I loved every minute of it. It was bloody hard work. I mean, I lost 2 years of my life when my young daughter was born because I barely saw her. Working day and night. I was, I won't go through the list of agencies I worked with, but I was with a company called Wilson Hartnell, newly born out of the ruins of another agency called Domas. Sorry, the cat needs to get into the conversation.
Starring role. What's the cat's name?
Toots, T-U-T-Z. He's half Egyptian. There we go.
Toots.
And I was a co-founder, for want of a better word. I was very highly paid at the age of 20, 21. I had my daughter at 21. Wilson Hartnell were a boutique agency. I think that's the right description for the time we were in, as the 1960, 65, my daughter was born. So it was the year 64, 65, we broke away from Domus, started a new agency. The main guys in the agency were very conservative. Michael Maughan, who was very, very Catholic, and Sean O'Brody, who had been a member of Maria Duce, the right-wing organisation. But they were two lovely guys. And when I did a Che poster, and I'm skipping forward, I know, they'd started a new company called Wilson Hartnell PR. And Wilson Hartnell PR did all the press work for the Che poster, the very first one, not the iconic red and black one now. But that got huge circulation right across Ireland, all fueled by Wilson Hartnell PR, and all they wanted was the credit. Like Jim Fitzpatrick was an art director at Wilson Hartnell. The end of everything at the Che, So that's how it became well known. I became well known really quickly. I was working there day and night. I loved it, but my health was suffering. I had alopecia at one stage because I'm very competitive. I loved that world. I loved getting new clients for this agency. Eventually, they gave me my own group and all that. Blah blah blah. I loved marketing, and I still do. I was only talking to my son the other day about going back to the concept we used to learn years ago of direct mail. I was trained by Frank Lawler, who was the expert in it, and he had a guy called Murray Raffoul, who was the top guy in the world at the time. So I was picking the brains of these people, on and off as I worked. And then even when I went out on my own as an artist, I still did a lot of freelance work. But in a meeting, I would be the guy who was listening to what these guys said because they knew their stuff down to the last percentage. In other words, you launch 1,000 mail shots, 3% return, you're making money. You know what I mean? That kind of stuff, basic stuff, which I still use in my logic today for the website. I like to give people something that they're not expecting. Every order they get a little something in it. And I never advertise it, never publish it. So I learned a lot at that time that served me well, especially, you couldn't make this bill up. That Che post is a black and white Che poster, and it was printed by a company that my friend Gilbert Brosnan, I mentioned, was with me in Kilkee, was the director, CEO of. Would you believe that? Yeah. Crazy.
It all comes around.
It was owned by the Kavanagh family, Mark Kavanagh, Murragh Kavanagh, were the people I was dealing with at the time. And he went on to start Captain America's. That's how I got all the work for those murals. So everything is kind of interconnected in Ireland in a small way, and in the world generally. It's a small world.
That decision to turn your back on the agency, and, let's face it, money is important. You had a young family. That was a colossal decision, wasn't it?
Huge. And the world collapsed shortly after. We had the petrol crisis where we ended up queuing for miles to get petrol. So there was no work, no nothing. I went over to England. I was invited by Alan Aldridge, the great pop artist, got a huge exhibition at Victoria and Albert not that long ago. He's dead now too, God rest him. Lily Aldridge's father, the model, and Miles Aldridge, the photographer, But he was a genius. And he started getting me tons of really top-class commercial work. I was doing a lot of work for Polydor Records. I did Planksty's first album.
I didn't know that,
Yeah, there's all these sort of connections. This is before Thin Lizzy. And I was coming and going to London all the time. Eventually, I had to stop that because Aer Lingus put up the fares to 200 for a day trip over and back. And 200 back then was like 2,000. And that's what Aer Lingus would be doing today if we're having a Ryanair. People slag Ryanair. Try going back to 2,000 to just go across the bloody water here, I was very lucky. I had a mortgage. I had a family. I had a house. I moved to Sandyford. I lived in Baldoyle originally, moved to Sandyford. But my first house was in Baldoyle, miles out from anywhere in the middle of the countryside. Do you know what I mean? That's why it was so cheap. Do you know how much I paid for my first house? $2,500.
Oh, wow.
You know what I mean? I was earning more than that in a week sometimes in advertising. Well, no, in a year in advertising. I was earning more than the President of Ireland. I remember somebody saying that to me at the time, and I was going, wow, I was earning really big money before I quit, But then, luckily, after a period of enormous debts piling up, I got work in London. I worked at a desk in Alan Aldridge Associates, who became a company called The Drawing Room. We had a rep who went out to I went with him to a lot of the agencies like J. Walter Thompson, picked up really big commissions, and literally started having a good life with myself and my ex. Do you know what I mean? My whole family suddenly, the boat lifts everybody,
Yeah, fantastic.
And I wasn't a gambler, I wasn't a drinker, I'm a pot smoker. I had thank God, no real vices. My worst vice was comic collecting. No collection of comics that's worth more than the bloody apartment I live in,
And Tim Booth then coming back into the story? How did that change everything?
Well, what happened was that Tim Boot, now we'll start with the Thin Lizzy story and I'll go through it quickly. Tim Boot was an artist, a very fine one. He was a friend of Frank Murray and Philip. He played in bands, so he had that connection. I didn't have any of that connection except with Frank. Frank Murray, by the way, managed the Pogues for years. And he was a great fixer for musical events, everything. A lovely man. He died only recently. And Frank knew me from football. I was also working with Peter Fallon and Eamon Carr, who went on to found Horselips. Peter Fallon founded the Gallery Press, published hundreds of poets. He's an amazing man. And Eamon is a journalist, one of the best people you'd ever meet still. Great fun. But they had a beat group called Tara Telephone, and I was a member of that. I did all the graphics. I did book covers for them, poetry covers for them. We had everybody coming and going. We got help from John Lennon, who gave us one of his original drawings. It was exhibited in the RHA only last year. Mark Bolan, who I met a couple of times, and one of my heroes, I did a poster for him. Allen Ginsberg came over, the poet from San Francisco, one of the great poets of the era. He wrote a book called Howl, Howl, amazing. Mike McGear, Paul McCartney's brother, David Bowie, they all helped us, right? They gave us lyrics to publish using their name. John had I don't know where it is now, I'm looking for it, took a photograph of himself and Yonu in the famous bed sitting in Amsterdam, holding up my book cover for Capella, our poetry magazine. You know what I mean? Would you imagine that today? Extraordinary stuff. We took it all for granted. Yeah, great. Thanks, John. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, everybody. I met Dave Bowie years later, and he was a lovely, lovely man, you know?
Everyone says that. Yeah, so Tim Booth.
Tim was a really good artist and a musician. He was scheduled to do the Thin Lizzy covers. So he did a beautiful logo for them, and then they joined Island. Chris Blackwell signed them for Island, and he had Roger Dean on board, and Roger did the cover for Tim Booth's band, despite the fact that Tim was supposed to be good enough to do Thin Lizzy's band work, you know. But they didn't want Tim doing anything like that. He had this, the band was Dr. Strangely Strange, a brilliant band, by the way. I loved them. And the first cover, if you look at it, is by Roger Dean himself, one of the greatest album cover artists of all time, and a good friend of mine back then. He was the guy who brought me into modern publishing, but we'll get over that at some point. But Tim decided that he couldn't do it because of the pressures on him from the record company. So Frank said, I know someone who can. And Eamon Carr told me this story only a couple of years ago. I didn't know it. Eamon and Philip were friends, and Philip came back to Eamon's gaff for a smoke, right? And on the walls were two poster poems I had produced, psychedelic poster poems for Tara Telephone. One for Peter, it was a poem by Peter called No Exit, and the other one was by Eamon. And Eamon's was a fuchsia ground, like dayglow, bright dayglow. I don't know if you know what dayglow means. It's supposed to shine in the dark nearly, you know? And on the bright dayglow, I printed a silver only. Like if you looked at it, your eyes danced, right? I still have a couple of them. And Philip saw these and he was going, my God, he loved them. Right, and he was saying, is that more West Coast stuff here? You know, I love all the West Coast, you know, Rick Griffin and all the psychedelic arts, who eventually all became great friends of mine, by the way, but that's another story. I went to hang out with them for a long time. And Eamon said, no, it's an Irish guy, Jim Fitzpatrick, does all the Capella stuff. So he spoke to Frank. Frank said, I play football with him. We can get him. Come on. So they rang me and flew over from London, and I met them in Neary's pub. And after, I don't think I had more than a pint, but we just hit it off. And of course, I have to be honest, I was always slightly in awe of Philip. He wasn't just a friend. Do you know what I mean? I used to think, holy fuck. You know, I would look up to him. He had so much going on in his head that it's a tragedy he's not around. He could be writing one of the great books. He really had a good literate mind. Destroyed by drugs. No point in pretending it didn't happen that way. He was using rhyming dictionaries in the end to try and get words together. His brain wasn't clicking, you know? That's what drugs do to you. But Philip, anyway, decided he wanted me to be the artist for Thin Lizzy, and that's how it all started. The first one I did was Vagabonds.
Yeah, and it's amazing. And I know the logo evolved and everything.
Oh, sorry, the logo, very quickly, I'll tell you. Tim Booth designed, if you look at Vagabonds, you'll see this kind of Cadillac-style logo across the top. Tim Booth designed that and then sent it to me in a letter that I have. I've published it.
I saw it on your website. Your website's amazing, and the stories of every logo, story of Che, but the story of all your Irish mythology, and it's amazing reading. You get, for anyone listening, there's incredible insights into who you are and what you do and your approach to everything and the stories behind them.
The credit should go to my son Redmond, because he's the one who got me doing it. He said, Dad, you've got to write about your stories, your life, because it's not just a bloody artist. It's interesting to other ordinary people.
It is.
I grew up in an ordinary little side street in Drumcondra in Glasnevin. Do you know what I mean? And I feel a great affinity to these people. And I remember pompously when the first black and white Che now came out, I did an interview, a full-page interview in the Evening Press, in which I announced I was producing art for the people, the proletariat. And that's the way my mind still works. I learned in advertising, nothing matters except exposure. You could put a cancer on a stick, like cigarettes, and you can sell it if you give it the right exposure. Enough people, like, look at vaping. Kids are dying of vaping now. It's the cigarette industry's revenge on the human population, I think. I never cared about whether I was exhibited, whether the art world thought I was doing something good, bad, or indifferent. And I got a lot of hostility and pushback from them, you know. I just felt I wanted my work to be public. And I remember my first exhibition in the Project Art Centre. I produced a poster for it, and I got a fly poster guy to do all the corporation sites and the building sites, you know, the hoardings. And I got up the next morning and went into town about 10 to get, meet someone and just have a look around, drive around, see was my money well spent. And I only saw about 4 of them. And I said to the guy, geez, I gave you over 100 of them. What the f*** is going on? And he went around with me and he said, it was there. People were picking them up, peeling them off and keeping them. You know what I mean? It was amazing. So that led me to produce, during the petrol crisis, when there was no money anywhere, to open a stall in the Dandelion Market and sell these posters. So that's where that all started. Everything happens by accident almost.
Of course it does. And the Thin Lizzy logo, and I know that evolved from that first version. I think you did a cover for a rocker, and it was a font type for rocker that Phil liked, and suddenly that font type incorporated into the Thin Lizzy logo proper then, didn't it? And that's
if I was to be very truthful, I should take no credit for that at all, except being the technical master that created it from somebody else's brilliant little spot. I did a poster for The Rocker. It's my favorite Thin Lizzy song. I used the big bike that Judge Dredd and the English comics used to ride, right? And it's a kind of a crazy, I look at it now and think it's kind of crazy. But I was trying to do a psychedelic kind of image, but in black and white, with no money for color. And on top is a variation of the Tim Boot logo with the kind of Cadillac style, and then The Rocker. And the TH of The Rocker grabbed Philip. And he said, can you turn that into Thin Lizzy? I had not thought of that, right? I'm working with Philip was a joy. I could tell you all the different stories. He came out with brilliant visual ideas. All I had to do was try and make them real almost, you know what I mean? That's how the Johnny the Fox border came about. Anyway, The Rocker, I sat down and I produced the Thin Lizzy logo, and if you saw the artwork, it's like that size, it's tiny. I had incredible eyesight. But the reason it was tiny was I was using a thing called a Bend-Aid dot to give a graded approach. He wanted kind of something a bit, not psychedelic, but just that the graded color thing was big at the time. So I did it in black and white using a dot, Letraset dot screen you cut out with a scalpel. But the dots dictated the size of my lettering, so it's literally tiny, so it'll blow up big.
I talk about gigs, and I know you said you've been to so many, and I've been to so many as well. I love music. I ended up having record stores. But at the age of 14, I saw my first gig ever, Thin Lizzy, City Hall in Cork.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
wow.
Phil Lynott in his prime. Yeah, it was just mind-blowing. And that iconic logo lit up.
I loved all that. I loved all that.
It was, what a privilege. So we know the story, the logo and the band and everything. But Phil, you were pals. Can you tell me about him? I hope you can join me on part 2 to hear about Jim's special relationship with Phil Lynott, his work with Sinead O'Connor, his obsession with Celtic mythology, and the secrets of a long, productive, enjoyable life. Thanks again for listening. Thank you for listening to the Win Happy podcast, which has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to send me an email at greg@fusion.ie. So until next time, take it easy.